It's been a big rift in Scottish nationalist world, but it doesn't seem like there's a big rift where you've got the likes of Ash Regan, who's a former candidate. She's gone over to Labour Party. She's now a member of the Scottish Parliament, the sole one, the one that Humza Yousaf was hoping would stand by him when the Greens were ousted by him from his coalition, because apparently the man can't count. Among his many failings, Humza Yousaf can't do basic arithmetic that a primary school age kid should be able to do. But it does seem like there's a very big rift within the SNP itself, doesn't it?
Well, it was always actually quite a broad church, at least historically, which is why you still have some quite socially conservative people knocking around like Kate Forbes. I mean, people used to refer to them as the Tartan Tories not too long ago. So this new reinvention as this woke, socially liberal party is a relatively recent phenomenon. But I think it's just a reminder that under the leadership of particularly Sturgeon and Yousaf, but you could say Alex Salmond to a certain extent as well on a lot of these issues, where they got really sidetracked on things which they really shouldn't have been sidetracked on. Their role was really to try and build as big a coalition as possible for Scottish secession. What allowing men into women's changing rooms had to do with that was never really obvious.
And rapists into women's prison cells. This is the thing. It is extraordinary. And we mentioned this a bit earlier. I'm amazed by the number of people who are sort of saying nice things about Humza Yousaf. Oh, I think he's a pretty decent guy. So one of my colleagues on another station, and even like Tim Montgomery, former editor of Conservative Home, saying let the guys resign. Let's be nice about him now. Don't ever get him. Like, are you kidding me? I mean, genuinely, I just find this quite bizarre. I mean, given, this is a man who was quite happy to throw not just women's rights, women's identity, women's existence. When people talk about, you're trying to raise trans people, no, you're literally raising women's existence as anything other than a figment of a man's imagination. We don't exist separately. Even the NHS has had to start admitting to that. But actually, women's safety, I mean, the safety of confused teenage children, I just find it extraordinary that people can be so forgiving of that. I'm not a forgiver. Unless someone goes, I have got this horribly wrong. I am very, very sorry. I was quite wrong to think this. I completely, go back on these things, and I apologise for calling everyone who called me out on it a bigot and a transphobe. And I was wrong and you were right. That I might forgive. Anything below that, no. I will hound you till the rest of your days, because this man was happy to allow for him to be thought of as a progressive, to allow a vulnerable prisoner behind bars, a woman, to be raped every night by a male rapist, the only kind there is, a rapist because you claim they were trans. He was quite happy for that to happen. How can you say this is a nice guy? How can anyone say that?
His record is awful, and just because he's quite good crack at dinner parties or something, I don't care.
Good eyelashes. He's got lovely eyes. Humza, you've got lovely eyes. Your only redeeming feature.
No one's challenging him, but on everything else, absolutely dreadful. And it's the one thing you can say is that Humza Yousaf, and many of us said this at the time, was a gift to unionism because of the fact that he was going to be Nicola Sturgeon, but with none of the competence. And he's proven that.
And she, such a good performer, wasn't she? But again, it turns out really rubbish at running Scotland. If you're going to, didn't actually deliver Scottish independence, didn't see an increase in support for Scottish independence. Everything she did during the COVID period, she did pretty much exactly the same as the Westminster government, who shamefully followed masks on kids and all that stuff, and actually had worse outcomes than England did, which is quite something. The NHS, longer waiting lists, same as with Labour in Wales. I think the Tories have absolutely buggered everything up, but wow, turns out Labour and the SNP even worse. Who knew? And all the culture wars. In schooling, Scotland used to be the envy of the world in terms of their schools. There's a reason why there are so many, people in British cultural life, in politics and in journalism who come from Scotland. It's because they had such good schools where they cared about qualities and standards. Well, no, not anymore. That's not going to happen anymore. I think it's extra. And the economy, having an entire net zero policy which was going to break the basis of independence, which was the fossil fuel industry in the North Sea. I mean, they're properly incompetent.
You could easily say that the Scottish National Party really don't like Scotland. They certainly don't like Scottish people very much. The whole time in office has been about how can we stop these people being so bigoted? How can we clamp down on what it is that they're saying? How can we force them to get with the programme when it comes to LGBTQ plus and all that stuff? That's basically been their whole plan. And, they, even at certain times, both Sturgeon and Yousaf have said things like, I kind of wish national or nationalist wasn't in our in our name. And I think that
they
kind
don't
of
like the
betrayed
word,
the fact that they really didn't like the country they were claiming to want to liberate.
They don't like the concept of nation.
Mm.
Which is why
they feel uncomfortable with it, which is why they want to get back in the EU instantly. But
absolutely. Don't want to be ruled by Westminster. You want to be ruled by Brussels instead.